Jesus has a way of speaking in a way that's sticky. A lot of times he'll speak, and whether it's an illustration or a turn of phrase, you can be reading through something he says and have it memorized by the time you reach the end of the sentence. I'm sure this is something that you've encountered. He'll say things that are very punchy, right? Abide in me and I in you. I'm the vine, you are the branches. Or he'll use illustrations that are hard to get out of your mind. When talking about the Pharisees, for example, he'll say, you guys, you strain out a gnat and you swallow a camel. That's an image that as soon as you get done listening to it or reading it, you've got it in your mind. Now that's likely because in the first century, people didn't have the Bible. People didn't have Jesus' words written down. Instead, this was all spoken, right? Jesus wanted his disciples to remember what he was going to say, so he speaks in a very punchy and memorable way. And our text this morning is no different. He has a very masterful way of getting our attention, and he does this. What he's going to do here is draw a great big contrast between the false teachers and his own teaching, and he's going to do that by repeating a word 4 times. Now, I'm sure if you look closely, you'll be able to see which word he's repeating over and over again in these short verses. In verse 23, one time, and then twice in verse 26, he says, when he's quoting these false Christs and these false prophets are saying, look over there, there's the Christ. Oh, look over there, there's the Son of Man, right? The false prophets and these false Christs, they're trying to direct the apostles' attention elsewhere. They're trying to get them off of their game. And instead, Jesus offers a correction and says, no, don't pay attention to that. These false Christs and false prophets, that's phony, it's nonsense, it's nothing, it's paper mache. Instead, what you ought to do is in verse 25, he says, see, I have told you beforehand. Now this word see is it's the same exact word. He's saying, no, don't look over there, look right here. That is where the source of true teaching is going to come. And so we're going to take this contrast, and this is going to be our setup for the morning. Jesus' theme, in fitting with the rest of chapter 24, remember he's going to say, don't be deceived, and then he'll teach something about the end times. In fitting with that, our theme for this morning is, do not be deceived. Everybody will see the second coming. Everybody will see it. It's not going to be private. Everybody will see the second coming of Jesus. So, we want to look at what deception is according to Jesus. What does it look like in the first century? How does deception look in our own day? And then what is the correction that Jesus offers? So, we start in verse 26. So, if they say to you, look, he's in the wilderness, don't go out. And if they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, do not believe them. Okay, now these false Christs and these false prophets, they're talking about where the Christ is, right? Up in verse 23, that's what they're talking about. And when we want to think about what is the Christ, we have to think all the way back in the Old Testament. Put our Old Testament hats on and remember that the Old Testament is one great big long story that ends with a great big question mark. Who is going to be this Messiah, right? The entire time we're looking for a king that's greater than David who's going to deliver his people. We're looking for a prophet that's greater than Moses, right? That's going to teach the people of Israel the true instruction of God. And this Christ in the Old Testament, Hebrew, is called a Messiah, right? Christ and Messiah. It's the exact same word. It's the exact same word. One's in Greek, one's in Hebrew. So that's what they're looking for the entire time. The Jews know that God is going to give them a deliverer. He's going to raise up a deliverer. And that's exactly who the Jews are looking for the entire Old Testament. Now, in Jesus' day, there are tons of these false messiahs, these people who are saying, God has sent me to deliver you people. And this is happening all over Israel. It's happening down in Egypt. It's happening up in Assyria. People that are promising to bring the deliverance of God to the people of God. This is happening all over the place. In the first century, the first century is exploding with people writing things. So just a very brief little history lesson. There's a Jewish writer who's writing about the history of the nation, right and around Jesus' time, and he recounts for us actually one of these this occasion where these false Christs are rising and leading people astray. So in the first century, this Jewish historian writes this. He recounts the event of deceivers and impostors who, under the pretense of divine inspiration, right? So all he's saying is that these messiahs, they've come and they said, God has told me to go deliver you guys, but it's false, right? God did not actually tell them to do that. These deceivers and impostors are fostering revolutionary changes. They're getting the people all stirred up in a tizzy. They're fostering revolutionary changes, and they're persuading the multitude to act like madmen, to lose their mind. And they're leading them out into the desert under the belief that God is going to give them deliverance there. And this is a historical practice. This is something that we have attested to us just in the pages of secular history. But we actually have occasions of this in the New Testament. So what these people would do is they would get really excited and say, we're tired of Rome bossing us around, so what we're going to do is we're going to run out into the caves. We're going to take a bunch of people and we're going to put them in caves. And as the sort of Roman troop comes bounding along through the land, what we're going to do is we're going to pounce on them. We're going to beat them all up. We're going to kill them. And that is how we're going to, little by little, that's how we're going to deliver ourselves from Roman oppression. And I don't know if you know this, we actually have one of these people in the New Testament. We have one occasion of one of these guys actually in the New Testament, and he's one of Jesus' disciples. They call him, they have a special name. They call him zealots. And so if you'll remember, there's one occasion in the Gospels where one of Jesus' disciples is called Simon the Zealot. So this is a man who heard about this social reform that he was. This man was incited to go out into the wilderness to seek deliverance for themselves from the Romans, and instead, this man rejected this teaching of this false Messiah, of this false deliverer, and instead he followed Jesus. He saw that social reform, that throwing off the Romans is not enough. That instead the teaching of Christ offers a much more substantive reform, right? A reform of the heart. And that the true Messiah is not, the true Messiah, the one that's going to deliver Israel, is not just going to deliver them from the Romans, but rather the Messiah is going to deliver his people from sin and death itself. These deliverers are promising something that is good. That Jesus is by no means saying that only social reform, that any kind of social reform is bad, right? He's not saying that by any means. But he is saying a gospel that is only social reform, that is only social change, without the gospel is powerless. It's weak. It is unable to bring about the kingdom of God. And more so, we have Jesus talking about these inner rooms, these false Christs saying, look, he's over here in this inner room, which is to say, he's here in the Messiah has come to us in these small and private meetings. They're secret, and only a select and privileged few can be in on this deliverance from foreign powers. Now, this is also false, as we're going to see later. that the deliverance that the true Messiah is going to bring is not something that's relegated just to a few in some pocket of the world somewhere, but that the kind of deliverance that Christ is offering is going to be, it's going to be worldwide. Now, in our own day, we have certainly no shortage of both of these occasions. Not even 30 years ago, I'm sure some of you will remember, there was a man out in Texas named David Koresh, or Koresh, no, I think it's Koresh. David Koresh, who incited a bunch of people and said that the second coming of Christ was near, and that it was his responsibility and the people around him to purify themselves, and that he was going to more or less deliver them into the hands of Christ. There's a great big hubbub, and it ended very poorly for that man and his followers. But that's just the same as someone taking this idea that God has revealed his second coming only to a very few, only to the select few, right? You see the same thing in something like a couple hundred years earlier from David Koresh, right? Joseph Smith saying, "God has revealed to me what his plan is, and if you stick close to me, then you'll be able to see the deliverance of God." But instead, Jesus corrects that notion and says, "Oh no, it is the deliverance of God is not to be found in some small back room somewhere, but rather God's plan for salvation comes through his Son, Jesus, and the means by which he's going to bring this deliverance about is going to be the church, right? The whole people of God. So, I don't know many of you, but I would imagine that when I think of an example like David Koresh or Joseph Smith, we might be tempted to say, yeah, but I mean that's those people. I would never, fall for some sort of cult leader that's, promising me deliverance or something like that. Let me offer two warnings that I think Jesus can give us from this text itself. Because earlier, Jesus is talking about false prophets as well. That false teaching regarding the second coming is just as pernicious, it's just as dangerous as some of the claims of these false Christs and these false deliverers. You and I are probably not going to be prone to falling for. There are not that many people that are saying, "Follow me out into the desert," and that's how you're going to be a good Christian. Probably not. But what's going to be much more prevalent in your life and in my life is people online. That's how deception is going to be peddled today. That it's not going to be so much you have to go to some little town in Texas to be amongst God's true people, but instead the internet is going to bring that kind of teaching right to your front door. You don't have to go way out of your way to be faithful. But rather, these false teachers are going to say, no, listen to my ministry, listen to my teaching. And this is where Jesus says, we need to be testing the spirits regularly. And that's what a lot of the New Testament epistles are about, is that not all teaching is correct, that not every person espousing to be a true teacher or a true prophet is one, and that we actually need to be testing these things regularly. So if someone says online, you come across teaching that is in direct contradiction to what Christ has said, that Jesus' advice, don't listen to them. Don't listen to them. Turn away from them. If you have brothers and sisters or neighbors who name the name of Christ and also have fallen for some of this false teaching as regards the second coming, right? People that have said that the second coming has already happened, or that the resurrection has already occurred, which are these occasions are numerous. That it's our job as brothers and sisters to keep that person, to try to win them back to the true teaching of Jesus. In addition, this teaching is often going to have the appearance of religiosity. That is to say, a lot of false teachers are not going to approach you with the notion that, by the way, I am a false teacher. I just want to let you know beforehand, before I really get into it, right? They're going to appear to be the real deal, right? This phrase, oh, look, the Christ is in the wilderness, right? This language of wilderness, it sounds very religious. It sounds very Bible-y, to use a word, right? God talks about the wilderness all the time. Isaiah's out in the wilderness. John the Baptist is out in the wilderness. Jesus himself is in the wilderness. And yet, these false teachers are using this language to try to deceive people away from the true teaching of their Lord. And so, if you're listening to someone online, if you're a big fan of someone's teaching ministry or preaching ministry, religious language alone is not sufficient for that person being a true teacher. So someone might use words like the flock of God, or even a bigger one, God told me this, right? Those sound like things that I've heard in the Bible before. And yet, if someone is saying things that are in direct contradiction to the teaching of Jesus while still using Jesus' name, it's the Christian's job to continually ask the question as we're mulling over teaching and writing. We need to continually ask the question, is that true? Is that actually what Jesus would have said? For example, there was I was talking with a friend recently who had said, when I'm praying, my pastor has told me not to ask for things. Not to ask for things, but rather, God is very powerful. He's called me his son. He's given to me all this power. Therefore, when I'm praying, what I ought to do is declare things that have not yet happened, and I should declare them as if they have happened. This is just a conversation that you can have anytime. Now, what that person is doing is they're using religious language. They're talking about prayer. They're talking about God giving people power, right? They're talking about disciples. These are all Bible words. This is all Bible language. And yet, when we look to Jesus' teaching about how to pray, what is one of the first things that Jesus says? Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right? Even Jesus himself does not pray like that. So it is upon the Christian to continually test what it is that we're hearing. And it would be remiss if I didn't add this one last thing. Once again, it might be easy to say, I'm not really going to fall for some sort of cultic leader saying, "Come, join me out in the desert." And you know what? think I can be pretty good about, discerning whether or not something is something that Jesus had said. This is a point that we can learn implicitly from Jesus' correction here. His intention to teach his disciples that they ought not to be deceived. This saying of Jesus is in 3 of 4 of the Gospels. So even the Gospel writers thought that this was a pretty important point to get across, in that we don't want to be deceived by false teaching regarding the second coming, because Jesus is going to offer a better and truer account of the world. I think one of the other ways that we can fall into deception is not listening to cult leaders or being mistaken about some element of theology. But one of the other ways that we can fail to hear Jesus' teaching here is by saying, you know what, there's no way I could fall for false teaching about the second coming, because ultimately I'm just kind of indifferent. I'm a little bit ambivalent to what Jesus says about the second coming. Issues of theology and Jesus' teaching, they just really aren't that interesting. So there's no way that I could fall for that. And that's something that's very real, that in talking with friends and family about this verse this last week, that I found occurs more often than anything else, is that no, there's no way that I could fall for this, but it's mostly because I'm so busy doing other stuff. I don't really have time to think about the second coming. I don't really have time to think about Christ's righteous rule here on earth and in heaven. And so that's another thing that I think we need to be aware of. And if that's what we see in our hearts, that I'm kind of ambivalent towards the teachings of Christ and what he has to say about his second coming, that's something that we ought to go to the Lord in prayer about. Father, help me to care about these things the way that you do. The attitude that Jesus has and the disciples have about righteousness and about finer points of theology. Father, help me to want to know those things. Help me to guard myself, not just for my own sake, but for the sake of my brother, or for the sake of my children, for the sake of the people that live around me. That false teaching is so ubiquitous. It's all over the place. And my brothers, my sisters, need as much help as they can get to discern what's true and what's error. So that can be a motivation for us to continually search out the scriptures to see if what we're hearing online is true, if what our neighbor or our coworker just found this last weekend and says, oh, hey, look. We can be able to discern whether or not those things are true when we devote ourselves and to God's word and pray and ask that He would help to show us what's there. Now, we've talked about deception a little bit. Now we're going to move into Jesus' positive teaching on, okay, what is going to be the second coming? Now, you'll see in verse 27, we start as a for. We start with the word for. Now, Jesus is about to give the grounds for why we ought to reject false teaching about Christ's second coming. And when I say the grounds, this is what I mean. I'm sure you probably remember as a kid, or if you are a kid, then not that long ago, that your mom might say something to you like, go clean your room. And you might want to inquire as to the grounds for why she's told you to do something. That is to say, you'll ask why, if you're a particularly rebellious child. And sometimes the grounds that she'll cite for cleaning your room is because I said so. And whereas that line of reasoning, if it came from any other place, might not be very convincing, one, your mother is telling you that, and you ought to respect your mom by being obedient to her. But two, she might be particularly persuasive if she had a sandal or like a kitchen spoon in her hand, and she was not afraid to use it. That's a pretty persuasive line of reasoning. So similarly, Jesus is going to give the grounds for why we ought to reject false teaching. And this is what he says. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. Now, we can learn at least 4 things about the second coming. Now, this is just going to be a taste because really Jesus is going to introduce this topic here, but Lord willing, next week is when you guys will hear the great big, he's got quite a bit to say about the second coming in the following verses. But here, this is just a very brief introduction. So we can learn 4 things. I have no mnemonic device. These aren't in any particular order. I have no fun acronym to think of. So these come in no particular order. The first thing that we can learn about Jesus' second coming from his own lips is that, 1, it's going to be visible, that you're going to be able to see him, right? This illustration, just as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, tells us a couple things. You're going to be able to see it, right? It's going to be obvious. You're not going to have to walk into work the day after the second coming and someone, one of your coworkers says, "Hey, did you see the second coming last night?" And you're going, "No, I didn't." It's going to be visible, and it's going to be universal. It's going to be something that everyone is going to be able to see. If you're in South Korea and Christ comes back from Jerusalem, he comes back in Jerusalem, you're not going to have to be able to listen to someone else tell you about it. It's going to be something that you're going to be able to witness. Remember in the beginning of Acts, right? Christ is just resurrected. He's talked to his disciples for a little bit, and he's about to go back up into heaven. And the disciples he has gone back up into heaven, and his disciples are all still standing there, gaping up into heaven, looking at the clouds. And the angel asks, "Guys, what are you doing?" He's going to come back the exact same way he left. That's to say, riding on the clouds of heaven. Well, similarly, we see that teaching corroborated here or backed up here in Jesus' direct teaching as well. That it's going to be his own body, that it's not going to be some incorporeal, or that it's going to be some metaphorical second coming, but that Jesus in his resurrection body is going to come down from the heavens with legions of angels. He's going to come back in his body. Everyone's going to be able to see him, and it's going to be a worldwide. It's going to be universal. Everyone is going to be able to see it. And lastly, one of the reasons why he uses this illustration of lightning is that it's going to be sudden. It's going to be immediate. That there's not going to be a sort of course of time over which the Son of Man is going to come back into the world. Right? The first coming, Jesus is alive for 33 years on earth before his work on the cross and his ascension. But when the second coming occurs, unlike what the false teachers are saying, is that, there's a false Christ and he's in the wilderness. He's building an army. We're scheming together to plan how we're going to overthrow the Romans. That's Jesus says, absolutely not. And any place else in the New Testament is going to say as much. The second coming is going to be immediate. It's going to be immediate, and it's going to be full of glory, and that is going to bring along with it the end of all things. Now we want to think about the second coming of Christ here for just a second. He uses these two illustrations, right? That the lightning occurs over here, and you see it all the way over here, right? It appears in the east, and you see it all the way in the west. And he uses a similar illustration in 28, right, about corpses and vultures, right? All he's saying there is, as you're walking around in the desert in your afternoon walk, you might not know that there's a dead rabbit 600 yards over that way. But if you look up in the sky and there's vultures circling around, you might be over here, but you can tell that something's going on over there. So he's just illustrating the same principle. So as he's illustrating this principle, we want to think again about what is Jesus talking about? What comes along with this second coming? Why is it that we should care? And there's a couple reasons. Not a couple reasons. There's a lot of reasons. There's more than just two. But one of the things that we want to keep in mind is that this second coming is not just some abstract notion of theology, but that it's an actual event that's going. It's an actual event that is going to occur, and that when Jesus comes, there's going to be a great divide in humanity. That when Christ comes, this is going to be the end of all things. He's going to come in glory. Everyone is going to see him as he is, as the king, right? We were just singing not just a little bit ago about how holy God is, right? That's something that we can confess today as Christians, but that our unbelieving neighbors, they don't believe. They don't see that. But when Christ comes a second time, that will be unmistakable. That when Christ comes in glory, he will be seen to be the king and the prophet and the priest that has been promised from the Old Testament. And he's going to get two very different responses. And these two very different responses we see all over the New Testament. On one end, Christ's coming is going to be a great glory to believers. That people who have been faithfully worshiping the Lord, seeking forgiveness from him, those who have been forgiven by him, they are going to be encouraged and rewarded for their faithfulness, right? Grandparents who have been faithful to bring up their children and their grandchildren in the admonition of the Lord, even though it's a great use of time and energy and sweat, and they are not quite sure if, man, are the things that I'm teaching even getting across? When Jesus is revealed that second time, all of that grandparents' work, all of their time and energy invested in their kid is going to be vindicated by Jesus himself. Those Nigerian Christians that were just martyred for their faith a couple years ago, it was a couple years ago, they will be seen to have made the right choice to die for their faith instead of cow to the pressures of the world. Even though their martyrdom looks like foolishness to the world, at the revelation of Jesus, they're going to be seen to have made the right decision. However, Christ's second coming is going to also have a different response. And that is going to be to the great shame and sadness of those who do not believe in him. Those who have not been received by God, those who have not been reconciled to God through his forgiving work in Jesus. But rather, this is how Revelation 6 talks about how the unbelievers are going to respond to Jesus' second coming. The sky's going to vanish like a scroll that's being rolled up. The kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of him who's seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath," that day of the Lord, that day of Jesus Christ, "has come, and who can stand it?" That is a serious and sober warning. If by chance you've come here today and you are not a believer, you do not know Jesus, you have not received his forgiveness, I am remarkably glad that you are here today to hear Jesus' teaching himself on what the second coming is going to entail. And yet it must be said that you, as of right now, are not in right standing with God, and that on that last day, if you have not turned from your sin, the record of your own sin will count against you. There is nothing that any of the people here in this room, if you're an unbeliever, there's nothing that anyone in this room would rather do more than take time with you this afternoon and talk to you about the gospel. Because it really is the free grace of God. If you know that you've not been reconciled to God, Isaiah will talk about God's forgiveness like this, that the people in the world know that they have nothing to win God with. They have nothing. They have no resources. And yet God in Isaiah is recorded as saying, "Come, buy and drink. I know that you have no money, but I will give you drink freely." And that is the free gift of grace in the gospel. So please, if you're not a believer, if this text in Revelation describes you, please turn to a neighbor and talk with them. Ask them about that. Ask me anything. It would be the best use of my afternoon. With that being said, there are two ways to respond to Jesus' teaching. One, we can cling closely to him, or two, we'll be we can be drawn away by deceptive practice and by deceptive teaching. Now, it's important to know that God's grace, if we're a Christian, is going to be it's unstoppable in our lives, and that even though we might waver or be confused or wander, we can be confident that the God who's drawn us near is going to persevere us. Paul refers to this in 1 Corinthians, this exact same notion, and he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, he says, "So that you're not lacking in any gift, as you wait for the revealing of our Lord Jesus Christ," this day of Jesus Christ, "who will sustain you to the end, guiltless in the day of our Lord Jesus." And we can be confident that God is going to persevere us through the last days if we're a Christian. At the same time, deception is something that's real and vibrant, and today, it's for today. And there's all sorts of deceptive teachers out there whose intention is to lead you astray. But we can know that if we're worried about false teaching or not knowing what the truth is, that we can pray and ask God that He would show us, that He would guide us as we read, to be able to discern truth and error. There are great sections in Scripture about this topic in particular, that if eschatology is some place where we feel weak and unsure, that we can turn to and ask for God to inform us and to guide our spirit as we pray and try to discern what's right. If that's something that you're interested in, and you feel weak here, something like 2 Thessalonians chapters 1 and 2 are really, really great. They're a real wonderful section in Paul's letter where he describes just these things, the second coming. Mark chapter 13 is another great one. And that would be great study for your time ahead of next week's teaching on the coming of the Son of Man. So with that, let's bow our heads in prayer and continue.